The morning Marcus Holloway walked into that small diner on Maple Street. He had already rehearsed his signature 47 times on napkins, receipts, and the back of his own trembling hand, because in less than 2 hours, that same signature would erase everything he had spent 23 years building. And what terrified him most wasn't losing his company, his savings, or even his dignity, but the quiet voice in his head that whispered he deserved every bit of it. The October air was bitter cold as he pushed open the glass door of Clara's Corner Cafe, a bell chiming overhead like some mocking church bell, announcing the end of an era, and the warmth inside hit his weathered face like a gentle slap, pulling him back from the numbness that had settled into his bones over the past 6 months. Marcus was 54 years old, with silver streaks running through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that told stories of late nights, broken promises, and 1,000 phone calls he wished he could take back. He wore his only remaining good suit, navy blue with a small coffee stain on the left cuff that he'd tried to scrub out that morning with dish soap in desperation, and he carried a brown leather briefcase that contained nothing but the documents that would officially declare him a failure. He chose a booth in the corner, away from the few early morning customers scattered throughout the diner, and he set the briefcase down beside him like a bomb he was afraid might detonate. "Coffee?" a voice asked, and Marcus looked up to see a waitress standing beside his table. She was perhaps 30, with kind brown eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her uniform slightly faded from years of washing, but pressed with obvious care, and her name tag read Alina in letters that had begun to peel at the edges. "Black," Marcus said, his voice rougher than he intended, "and maybe a moment of peace, if you've got any of that on the menu." Alina smiled, not the practiced smile of someone working for tips, but the genuine smile of someone who recognized pain when she saw Eton. She said, "Peace comes with the second refill, sir, but I'll see what I can do about rushing your order." She returned moments later with a steaming cup and set it down gently, and as she did, her eyes caught the edge of the documents peeking out from his open briefcase. Legal papers, dense with text, and flagged with those bright yellow sign here tabs that Marcus had come to hate. "That's a lot of paperwork for a Tuesday morning," Alina observed, not prying, but simply acknowledging. And Marcus surprised himself by responding honestly rather than with the defensive walls he'd built around his heart. "It's my bankruptcy filing," he said, the words tasting like ash on his tongue. "I have to sign it at my lawyer's office at 10 o'clock. And then everything I've built, my grandfather's lumber company, the 53 employees who trusted me, the legacy of 3 generations, all of it just disappears like it never mattered." Elena's expression shifted into something deeper, something that suggested she understood loss in ways that went beyond surface sympathy. And instead of offering empty platitudes, she simply asked, "Have you eaten anything this morning?" Marcus shook his head, and Elena said, "Then you're not signing anything important on an empty stomach, not in my diner. Let me get you some toast at least, on the house." As she walked toward the kitchen, Marcus found himself watching her. There was something in the way she moved, purposeful yet gentle, that reminded him of his late wife, Catherine, who had passed 4 years ago from an illness that had stolen her slowly while Marcus was too busy trying to save a company that would eventually crumble anyway. Catherine had always been the one who read the fine print, who asked the uncomfortable questions, who made Marcus slow down and think before he signed anything. "You're brilliant at building things, Marcus," she used to say, "but you're terrible at seeing when people are taking advantage of you." The memory hit him like a wave, and he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. Alina returned with toast and a small cup of orange juice, setting them down with quiet efficiency, and as she did, a sudden gust of wind from another customer entering the diner sent one of the documents flying from Marcus's open briefcase. Alina caught it mid-air with reflexes that suggested she was accustomed to catching things before they cups, perhaps even people, and, as she went to hand it back, her eyes scanned the page almost involuntarily. the way anyone might glance at words placed directly in front of them. She froze. "Sir," she said slowly, her voice taking on a different quality, sharper and more alert, "I don't mean to intrude on your private affairs, but can I ask you something about this document?" Marcus looked up, confused by the sudden change in her demeanor, and nodded. "This paragraph here," Alina said, pointing to a section near the bottom of the page. "It lists the outstanding debt that triggered the bankruptcy, filing specifically a loan of $2.3 million from Westfield Capital Partners, dated March 15th of last year. Do you remember signing this loan agreement?" Marcus's brow furrowed. "Of course I do. We needed the capital to upgrade our equipment, my business partner, Daniel. He brought in the investors and handled all the arrangements. I signed the paperwork he prepared." Elena's jaw tightened, and she pulled a chair from a nearby table and sat down across from Marcus without asking permission, a breach of Waitress protocol that she seemed to deem necessary. "Sir, I need to tell you something about myself before I say anything else," she began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of old pain. 5 years ago, I was a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in the city. I was good at my job, really. Good until I trusted the wrong person. My supervisor, who was using me to help him embezzle from clients without my knowledge. When it all came out, I was implicated too, and even though I was eventually cleared, my reputation was destroyed. I lost my license, my career, my apartment, everything except my dignity and my eye for numbers. She paused, meeting Marcus's eyes directly. I took this job at Clara's diner because Clara gave me a chance when no one else would. And I promised myself I would never ignore another red flag as long as I lived. And sir, this document is covered in red flags. Marcus felt his heart begin to pound in a way it hadn't in months, not with fear, but with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alina pointed to specific lines on the document, explaining with the precision of someone who had spent years studying financial fraud. "This loan agreement references a promissory note dated 3 months before the loan was supposedly issued. That's backwards. You can't promise to repay money before you've received it. And here, look at this signature. It says, it's yours, but it's countersigned by a notary in Henderson County. Didn't you tell me your company is based here in Clearwater? Henderson County is 200 miles away." Marcus grabbed the document from her hands, his eyes scanning frantically. Pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed beginning to click into place. "I never signed anything in Henderson County," he said, his voice rising with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "Daniel handled all the notary appointments. He said it was more convenient for the investors to meet halfway, ... His words trailed off as the implications crashed over him like a cold wave. Alina nodded grimly. "I think you need to look at every document your partner prepared for you. And I think you need to do it before you sign anything that makes his mess into your legal responsibility." For the next 3 hours, Marcus and Alina sat in that corner booth as the morning rush came and went around them. Clara, the elderly owner of the diner, noticed what was happening and quietly took over Elena's tables without a word, bringing them fresh coffee and sandwiches and shooting curious but understanding glances their way. Marcus spread every document from his briefcase across the table, and Alina examined each one with the focused intensity of someone being given a second chance to use a skill she thought she'd lost forever. What they discovered was systematic and devastating. Daniel Mercer, Marcus's partner of 12 years, had apparently been siphoning money from the company for at least 3 years, creating fake vendor accounts, forging Marcus's signature on loan documents, and slowly building a paper trail that would make Marcus appear responsible for debts he'd never actually agreed to. "He was my friend," Marcus said at one point, his voice cracking. "We met at Catherine's funeral. He seemed so sincere, so eager to help me keep the company running while I was grieving. He said he wanted to honor her memory by making sure her husband didn't lose everything. Alina reached across the table and touched his hand, briefly a gesture of human connection that transcended the boundary between stranger and friend. The people who hurt us worst are often the ones we trusted most, she said quietly. That doesn't make you foolish, Marcus. It makes you human. Marcus looked at this woman, this waitress, who had been a forensic accountant. This stranger who had caught a single page from his briefcase and potentially saved his entire life. He felt something he hadn't felt since Catherine's death. Genuine gratitude. Why are you helping me? He asked. You don't know me. This isn't your problem. Alina was quiet for a moment, her eyes drifting to the window, where morning sunlight was now streaming in, painting golden stripes across the checkered floor. 3 years ago, she said finally, when I was at my lowest, I walked into this diner with nothing but $12 and a lot of shame. Clara saw me crying in a booth and sat down next to me, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, the universe has a way of putting people exactly where they need to be, not for their own sake, but for someone else's. She gave me a job that same day. I think maybe. She paused, a small smile crossing her face. I think maybe you were supposed to come into this diner this morning, and I was supposed to be here to catch that piece of paper. Marcus felt tears threatening behind his eyes, the first tears he'd allowed himself in longer than he could remember. What do I do now? He asked. Alina stood up and began organizing the documents into neat piles. First, you call your lawyer and cancel that 10 o'clock meeting. Then, you find yourself a different lawyer, someone who specializes in fraud cases. I have a friend from my old life, someone who believed in my innocence even when no one else did. Her name is Rachel Foster, and she's one of the best financial crime attorneys in the state. I'll give you her number. She paused, then added with quiet intensity, and Marcus, you need to go to the police. What Daniel did to you is criminal, and the only way to clear your name and save your company is to expose what he's done before he can cover his tracks any further. The next several weeks passed in a blur of depositions, investigations, and late-night phone calls as the truth about Daniel Mercer's betrayal came fully into the light. Rachel Foster was everything Alina had promised, brilliant, tenacious, and deeply compassionate, and she worked alongside Marcus to unravel the web of fraud that had nearly destroyed him. It turned out that Marcus wasn't Daniel's first victim. He had run similar schemes on 2 other companies over the past decade, always targeting business owners who were grieving or vulnerable, always positioning himself as a savior before becoming a parasite. When the authorities finally arrested Daniel at his vacation home purchased, it was discovered, with money stolen from Marcus's company, Marcus felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for the friendship he thought he'd had and the trust that had been so thoroughly violated. But amid the wreckage, something beautiful began to grow. Marcus's company, Holloway Lumber, was not only saved from bankruptcy, but began to thrive once the financial bleeding was stopped. His employees, who had feared for their jobs for months, rallied around him with a loyalty that brought tears to his eyes. We always knew something wasn't right about Daniel. His operations manager, a woman named Grace, who had worked for his grandfather, told him, we just didn't know how to prove it. We should have spoken up sooner. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. You're speaking up now, he said. That's what matters. And through it all, Marcus found himself returning to Clara's Corner Cafe again and again, not just for the excellent coffee, but for the morning conversations with Alina that had become the brightest part of his week. He learned more about her story, how she had grown up in foster care, how she had worked her way through night school to become an accountant, how the false accusations had nearly broken her, and how Clara's simple kindness had given her the foundation to rebuild. I spent so long being angry, Alina admitted one morning, about 2 months after they'd first met. Angry at my supervisor for using me, angry at the system for failing me, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. But anger is exhausting. At some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let the worst thing that happened to you define the rest of your life. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. Catherine used to say something similar. She'd say, "Grief is love with nowhere to go." I think I spent so long grieving her that I forgot how to live, and that made me an easy target for someone like Daniel. "And now?" Alina asked. Marcus looked around the little diner at Clara, wiping down the counter, at the regulars who had become familiar faces, at the woman across from him who had seen him at his lowest and treated him with nothing but dignity. "Now," he said, "I think I'm finally ready to start again." 6 months later, on a warm April morning, Marcus stood in front of a gathered crowd outside a newly renovated building on Maple Street. A large ribbon stretched across the entrance, and a sign above the door read the Catherine Holloway Community Center providing second chances since 2024. Among the crowd were the employees of Holloway Lumber, the regulars from Clara's Diner, Rachel Foster, with her husband and 2 children, and at the front, in a new dress that Clara had insisted on buying her, stood Alina, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "This center," Marcus said, his voice strong and clear, in a way it hadn't been in years, "is dedicated to everyone who has ever been knocked down by life and wondered if they'd ever get back up. It will offer job training, financial literacy classes, legal aid for those who can't afford it, and most importantly, a community of people who believe in second chances. Because I stand here today only because a stranger in a diner believed that I deserved one." He paused, his eyes finding Alina's. "Actually, not a stranger, a friend, the best friend I never expected to find." Alina smiled through her tears as Marcus continued, "This center is named for my late wife, Catherine, who always saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. But it exists because of everyone who helped me when I couldn't help myself. Clara, Rachel, Grace, and especially Alina, who taught me that sometimes the people who save our lives aren't wearing capes or uniforms. Sometimes they're wearing aprons and name tags, and sometimes they just happen to catch a piece of paper at exactly the right moment." After the ribbon cutting, as the crowd dispersed to explore the new center, Marcus found Alina standing quietly by the window, looking out at the street. "You could run the financial literacy program," he said, coming to stand beside her. Rachel said, "Your accounting credentials could be restored, given everything that's come to light. You could be a forensic accountant again or something, even better." Alina turned to face him, and there was a peace in her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "Clara told me yesterday that she's thinking about retiring. She wants to travel, see her grandchildren more. She asked if I'd be interested in taking over the diner, and," Marcus prompted, "and I told her I needed to think about it. But honestly, I think I already know my answer." She looked back out the window at the diner across the street, its familiar sign glowing softly in the morning light. "I was good at being a forensic accountant," she said, "but I think I'm better at being exactly where I am. That diner is where I found myself again. It's where I found you. Some places just have a way of bringing people together who need each other." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "Then maybe I'll just have to keep coming in for coffee every morning," he said, "to keep an eye on my investment." Alina laughed. "What investment?" "I'm thinking of becoming a silent partner," Marcus said with a smile. "Someone needs to make sure Clara's legacy continues. Someone needs to make sure that diner stays exactly what it is, a place where people can walk in carrying their whole broken lives in a briefcase, and walk out with a reason to keep going." Elena's eyes glistened again. "I think Catherine would have liked that idea." "I think she would have liked you," Marcus replied quietly. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the morning sun rose higher over Maple Street, bathing the little corner of the world in gold. And somewhere in the universe, perhaps, the people who had hurt them both were facing consequences while the people who had helped them were being rewarded, and everything was finally, imperfectly, beautifully balanced, not because life is fair, but because sometimes, if we're very lucky, we find ourselves exactly where we need to be, at exactly the right moment, to catch something important before it falls.